The required keyword has been added in C#11 in order to solve one particular problem, the excessive boilerplate code. Let me show you what I mean. We have a person class with two properties, first name and last name. And the crucial point here is that I want to guarantee that those two properties are initialized by the caller when a new instance is created. To do that, I add a constructor, pass in values and assign them. Now we have a inherited class which just adds a single extra property, salary, and again, to guarantee these are all defined, we have a constructor, this time taking three properties. This is all simple stuff. We can then create instances with parameters in the constructor. But imagine you have not just two classes as here, imagine you have hundreds of data classes. Imagine you have an inheritance hierarchy that goes 3, 4, 5 or deeper. We end up with an awful lot of this boilerplate constructor code. So that's the purpose of the required keyword, to try and get rid of this code. So let's take an example. Let's get rid of the boilerplate constructors, and then we're going to switch from using the construction to provide values to object initialization, as we can see here. Now, in order to make this work, we need to add an init so that the values are allowed to be initialized during construction. And now if we go down, we can see we don't have an error. However, here's the problem. Let's say that I delete a couple of these. There's no error. This is a problem. We need it to show an error because we want to make sure that the first name and last name have been provided. And this is where the required keyword comes in. If I add required at the front of these three properties, it tells the compiler when you create a new instance through object initialization, you must insist that all of those are defined. And now you can see that we get an error. You can see the new keyword here and here have errors. And we can see that the error window shows them. And now I have to add the properties to get rid of that error. Great. So this solves the problem, and this is the main purpose of the required keyword, to get rid of all this boilerplate code. And you can see here the amount of code is much reduced and much more readable. We can still add our own constructors. Here's one that takes the full name, splits it in half and assigns it to the first name, last name. We also have to add a constructor to employee that takes the full name, and we're going to default the salary. Now our code below, we're going to convert to creating using our new helper constructor, but you'll see here that it gives an error because the required member hasn't been defined. Even though that we look at the code and we can see that inside person we've assigned these two values, the compiler isn't able to infer that. This is where a new attribute comes into play. When you take your constructor and apply the sets required members attribute, it tells the compiler, don't worry about this constructor, take my word for it, all of the required properties have been defined with values, therefore it's safe. We need to do the same thing with the derived class. Because the base class has sets required members, any derived class that calls it has to also have that attribute. Now that we've done that, our new calls no longer have red squiggly lines, there's no errors, it works perfectly fine. We still want to make use of object initialization. Let me add back creation using that method. You can see we currently have an error. That's because we need to go back up here, and because we have a specific constructor, we have to add back a default constructor. We'll do that for the employee and the person object. And now both options work. We can use our special constructor and we can also use object initialization. So let's double check that deleting a couple of values, yes, required keyword is working because now it's given us an error on the object initialization because it hasn't met that criteria. There we go, the new required keyword. Don't forget the use of the attribute so that you can create your own constructors. The required keyword can be used against fields as well as properties, and you can use it inside records and structs as well as classes. I hope you found that useful. If so, hit the like button. Until next time, happy coding.